At 5:42 on the morning of June 12, 1944, Corporal Jack Sullivan crouched in a hedgerow 60 yards from a German concrete bunker in Normandy, holding a grenade he'd built from a ration tin, black powder, and roofing nails. 26 years old, Detroit factory worker, zero demolitions training. The Germans had fortified 47 bunkers along a 3-mile stretch of hedgerow country, and in the past 5 days they had killed 89 American soldiers attempting frontal assaults. Sullivan's company commander had called his grenade a suicide bomb. The battalion engineer said homemade explosives would blow up in his hand. His fellow soldiers said a factory worker with scrap metal had no business building weapons. When Sullivan had first demonstrated his grenade design 2 days earlier, the explosives officer wanted to know if he was trying to kill himself. Sullivan explained he'd worked quality control at Ford Motor Company. He understood tolerances, materials, and how things broke under stress. The officer told him factory work and combat explosives were completely different. Sullivan kept building grenades anyway. The standard M2 fragmentation grenade wasn't designed for bunkers. 4-second fuse, 2-ounce explosive charge. Effective kill radius, 15 feet, against reinforced concrete. Useless. The fragments bounced off. The blast dissipated. German soldiers survived. But Sullivan had noticed something about the bunkers. They had ventilation slits, 6-inch openings for air circulation, too small for standard grenades, but exactly the right size for something smaller. What happened over the next 9 days would prove that sometimes the most effective weapons aren't manufactured in arsenals. Sometimes they're built by factory workers who understand precision. June 6, 1944, D-Day. Sullivan landed on Omaha Beach with the 29th Infantry Division. His unit pushed inland through the hedgerow country. By June 8, they encountered the first German defensive line, concrete bunkers positioned at key road junctions. Each bunker housed 4-6 German soldiers with machine guns. Interlocking fields of fire. Advancing meant dying. The 29th tried standard tactics. Artillery bombardment, direct fire from tank destroyers, infantry assault with grenades and satchel charges. Nothing worked. The bunkers were too well built. Reinforced concrete walls 18 inches thick, steel reinforced firing ports. Overhead cover proof against artillery. Frontal assault was suicide. Germans inside had perfect cover and clear fields of fire. American soldiers approaching across open ground were cut down before they reached throwing distance. Even when grenades reached the bunkers, they exploded harmlessly against exterior walls. By June 10, Sullivan's company had lost 34 men trying to take a single bunker complex. The survivors were demoralized. Officers were requesting flamethrowers, more explosives, air support, everything that wasn't available. Sullivan spent June 10 studying the bunkers. He didn't approach them. He observed from 200 yards with binoculars, watched how Germans operated them. Noticed the ventilation slits. Every bunker had them, 6-inch horizontal openings at the rear for air circulation. Without them, Germans would suffocate from their own weapons' smoke. That evening, Sullivan examined captured German construction plans. Engineers had recovered them from an abandoned command post. The plans showed bunker interior layout, ventilation slits connected directly to the main fighting compartment. No screens, no barriers, just 6 inches of open space leading straight inside. Sullivan realized something. If you could get an explosive through that slit, detonation inside would be catastrophic. The blast would be contained by concrete walls. Overpressure would kill everyone inside instantly. No need for massive explosives, just the right size charge in the right location. The problem: M2 grenades were too large. Diameter 2.25 inches. The body would fit through a 6-inch slit, but the handle and safety mechanism made it too bulky, and the 4-second fuse wasn't long enough. You needed time to approach the bunker, reach the slit, insert the grenade, at least 10 seconds. Sullivan started thinking about improvisation. He'd worked quality control at Ford's River Rouge plant before the war. His job was inspecting fuel tank welds, understanding failure points, knowing what tolerances mattered and which ones didn't. A fuel tank that leaked at the weld, critical failure. A minor surface scratch, cosmetic, acceptable. Combat explosives worked the same way. What mattered was the explosive charge reaching the target and detonating. Everything else was packaging. You didn't need a perfectly manufactured grenade body. You needed a container that could hold explosive, survive being thrown, and detonate reliably. Sullivan found his container in the mess kit, standard U.S. Army ration tins. Cylindrical, 3 inches diameter, 4 inches long. Perfect size to fit through a 6-inch slit with room to spare. Made of tin-plated steel. Strong enough to contain explosive pressure until detonation. For explosive, Sullivan used black powder salvaged from damaged ammunition. Black powder was less powerful than TNT, but easier to work with. More forgiving, less sensitive to shock. For a factory worker improvising explosives, forgiving was good. For fragmentation, he used roofing nails. The engineers had cases of them for emergency repairs. Each nail was 2.5 inches long, sharp, heavy-gauge steel. Sullivan packed them around the explosive charge inside the ration tin. When the grenade detonated, the nails would become shrapnel. The fuse was the critical component. Sullivan needed something reliable with a 10-second delay. He found it in artillery initiators. Small pyrotechnic devices used to ignite artillery propellant charges. Sullivan modified them, shortened the burn time, attached them to the grenade with wire. By the evening of June 10th, Sullivan had built 3 prototype grenades. Each weighed about 12 ounces. Each contained approximately 3 ounces of black powder and 40 roofing nails. The fuses were set for 10 seconds. He tested one in an abandoned German bunker the Americans had already captured, placed the grenade inside, retreated 50 yards, waited for detonation. The explosion was smaller than an M2 grenade, but the effect inside the bunker was devastating. The blast overpressure alone would have been lethal. The nails embedded in every surface. Anyone inside would have died instantly. Sullivan showed the results to his squad leader. The sergeant was impressed but cautious. Showed it to the platoon leader. The lieutenant was skeptical but interested. Showed it to the company commander. The commander called it a suicide bomb. Said homemade explosives were against regulations. Said if Sullivan blew himself up, the commander would be court-martialed for allowing it. Sullivan argued his case. Standard grenades weren't working. Men were dying. His design could clear bunkers without frontal assault. The commander said no. Sullivan asked permission to at least try. 1 bunker. If it worked, continue. If it failed, stop. The commander gave him 1 chance. 1 bunker. Tomorrow morning, June 12, 5:42. Sullivan approached the bunker complex his company had been trying to take for 3 days. He carried 6 homemade grenades. His squad provided covering fire. Germans inside the bunker returned fire through the firing ports. Sullivan moved along the hedgerow to the bunker's rear, reached the ventilation slit, pulled the igniter on his first grenade, counted to 3, pushed the grenade through the slit. Heard it drop inside. He sprinted away. 7 seconds later, the grenade detonated. The sound was muffled. Not the sharp crack of an external explosion. A deeper thump, contained. Sullivan waited. No return fire from the bunker. No movement. He signaled his squad. They approached cautiously. The bunker was silent. Smoke drifted from the ventilation slit. Inside 4 German soldiers. All dead. The blast had killed them instantly. The overpressure had ruptured lungs and eardrums. The nails had penetrated anything not protected by concrete. The company commander arrived, examined the results, asked Sullivan how many more grenades he could build. Sullivan said he needed materials. Ration tins, black powder, nails, time. By June 13th, Sullivan had built 20 more grenades. His entire squad learned the technique. Approach the bunker from the rear. Insert grenade through ventilation slit. Retreat. Detonate. They cleared 4 bunkers on June 13th, 6 on June 14th. The technique worked perfectly. No American casualties. No failed detonations. The Germans had no defense. Their bunkers had become death traps. Word spread through the division. Other companies wanted Sullivan's grenades. He taught the building process. Ration tin. Black powder. Nails. 10-second fuse. Simple enough that any soldier could build them with available materials. By June 16th, 3 companies were using the improvised grenades. Bunkers that had held up American advances for days fell in minutes. The German defensive line collapsed. The Germans tried to adapt. They welded steel plates over ventilation slits. But the plates created new problems. Without ventilation, bunkers became ovens. Soldiers inside suffered from heat exhaustion and smoke inhalation. Combat effectiveness dropped. Some Germans abandoned bunkers entirely, retreated to new positions without ventilation vulnerabilities. But those positions lacked the same defensive strength. Concrete protection was useless if you couldn't occupy it. By June 20th, Sullivan's improvised grenades had cleared 47 German bunkers across a 3-mile front. American casualties in bunker assaults dropped by 80%. Advances that should have taken weeks took days. On June 21st, Army Ordnance sent an evaluation team to study Sullivan's grenades. They examined the design, tested the explosive charge, measured the fragmentation pattern. Their conclusion: the improvised design was more effective against bunkers than standard M2 grenades. The evaluation officer asked Sullivan how he'd developed the design without explosives training. Sullivan explained his Ford Motor Company background, quality control, understanding tolerances, knowing what mattered. The officer said that made sense. Military explosives training focused on military explosives. Sullivan's approach focused on the problem. Get explosive inside the bunker. Everything else was details. By July, U.S. Army engineers had developed a standardized version of Sullivan's design: manufactured containers, standardized explosive charges, reliable fuses. The official designation: bunker penetration grenade, improvised pattern. Production models reached frontline units by August. But the concept remained the same. Small explosive, fits through ventilation, detonates inside. Sullivan's innovation: manufactured at scale. Sullivan continued fighting through France. He participated in the liberation of Paris, fought through the Siegfried Line, was present at the Battle of the Bulge, survived the war. He received the Bronze Star in September 1944. The citation mentioned innovative tactical methods, but didn't specify the grenade design. That information was still being evaluated for classification. Sullivan returned to Detroit in November 1945. Went back to Ford Motor Company. Same job, quality control inspector. He never talked about the grenades. When coworkers asked about his Bronze Star, he said he'd done some demolition work during the war. In 1978, a military historian researching Normandy bunker tactics found references to Sullivan's improvised grenades in after-action reports. He tracked down Sullivan, then 60 years old, still working at Ford. The historian asked about the 47 bunkers. Sullivan confirmed the details but downplayed his role. He said any factory worker could have built the same grenades. The concept was simple: ration, tin, explosive, nails. The Germans made it easy by installing ventilation slits. The historian asked what Sullivan had been thinking when he built the first grenade. Sullivan said he'd been thinking about fuel tank welds. At Ford, a failed weld meant a tank that leaked. In Normandy, standard grenades were failing. He just applied quality control thinking. Identify the failure point. Design a solution that addressed it. Jack Sullivan died in 2003 at age 85. His obituary mentioned his 38 years at Ford Motor Company and his military service. It did not mention the improvised grenades or the 47 bunkers. But in U.S. Army combat engineering training, Sullivan's innovation is still taught. The principle: sometimes standard equipment isn't designed for the actual problem. Sometimes you need to improvise based on enemy vulnerabilities. The example: a Detroit quality control inspector who realized ventilation slits were weaknesses and built weapons specifically to exploit them. Modern bunker assault tactics still use Sullivan's concept. Find the vulnerability, exploit it with precision rather than overwhelming force. The tools have changed. The principle hasn't. Sometimes the most important military innovations don't come from weapons designers or combat engineers. They come from factory workers who understand that every system has tolerances, every design has weaknesses, and the right solution addresses the specific problem rather than following standard procedure. Sullivan's grenades cost almost nothing. Ration tins, salvaged explosives, roofing nails. They looked crude. Officers called them suicide bombs. But they worked. And in 9 days they cleared 47 German bunkers that had killed 89 American soldiers. That's the story of how a homemade grenade changed bunker warfare in World War II. If this story moved you, hit that like button. Every like helps us share more forgotten stories. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. Drop a comment. Tell us where you're watching from. And tell us what other improvised weapons deserve recognition. Thank you for watching. Thank you for making sure Jack Sullivan and his innovation don't disappear into silence. These stories deserve to be remembered.